I'm Tom Kay, and this is another science adventure with D.B. Cooper. If you've been following me for the past several years, you know that along with my colleagues Carol Abrazinskis and Alan Stone, we've worked with the FBI in doing some research into the famous cold case of D.B. Cooper, the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. history. For those of you who don't know who D.B. Cooper is, back in 1971, a man wearing a black tie, a black suit, and dark sunglasses boarded a plane in Portland, Oregon, bound for Seattle. Once they were in the air, he called the flight attendant over, handed her a note, and said, "I'm hijacking the plane. I have a bomb in my suitcase." From there, they landed in Seattle, and over the period of the next several hours, brought on board $200,000 in $20 bills, 4 parachutes, and then at that point, Dan Cooper released all the passengers. Shortly thereafter, the plane took off from Seattle, headed south, potentially to Mexico, but they didn't have enough gas to get there, and somewhere just before Portland, Dan Cooper, alone in the back of the plane, lowered the rear air stairs of the 727 and jumped out into the rainy night, never to be seen again. Since then, Dan Cooper has become somewhat of a legend. There's been movies and songs written about the man, but no one has ever found out who he is because Dan Cooper was an alias. So if a guy jumping out of an airplane wearing a suit in the middle of the night, not knowing where he would land with $200,000 in cash, isn't enough of an interesting story, there's actually another aspect to the D.B. Cooper case that many Cooper-philes think is even a bigger mystery than who Cooper was. About 9 years after the event in 1971, a young boy named Brian Ingram with his family was having a picnic on a beach along the Columbia River at a place known as Tina Bar. Beautiful day, they were going to dig a little fire pit, make a fire, have a nice little get-together. While the young Brian Ingram was digging this little pocket in the sand, he happened to roll up 3 bundles of bills. Well, they were quite excited, but the bills were quite rotted, and the rubber bands that were holding the bundles together were rotted and fell away to the touch. A few days later, they figured out with some help from the FBI that this was D.B. Cooper's money because we had the serial numbers from the original batch. This was the first evidence that had come to light from the D.B. Cooper escapade since the 1971 event. The FBI prowled over the entire beach. They looked under the water there at the river, looking for evidence that maybe D.B. Cooper fell there or the rest of the money was there, but it wasn't. There was only 3 bundles of $20 bills amounting to just a little less than $6,000. Eventually, Brian Ingram was able to actually keep the bills, and now they're coveted as collector's items. But the mystery is that we have a pretty good idea where Cooper jumped, and it was 20 miles away from this beach on Tina Bar. How could the money possibly get there? So over the years, there have been many theories on how the money would finally come to rest on Tina Bar. The theory favored by the FBI was the Washougal washdown theory, where they thought that Cooper died somewhere in the North Woods, his body rotted, the money rolled out of a money bag, and then rolled down several tributaries through rivers over several years, eventually ended up in the Columbia River upstream of Tina Bar, and then was thrown up on Tina Bar during a dredging operation in the late 70s. This has been discounted. We did some research with the citizen sleuths and found out that there are actually no streams that go that far north. Other ideas have been an alteration of the flight path. Cooper landed in the water next to Tina Bar. Somebody came and buried the money later, possibly as a distraction to the FBI. It's really been a huge mystery. Why would you put money in the sand on a beach? If it wasn't that, how did 3 bundles come to rest naturally by themselves? This led to some thoughts that maybe there was an external canvas package or something that the money was in that rotted away, but there was no evidence of anything else with the 3 bundles. So this has generated a lot of mystery. And in the 40 years since the findings, there's been no evidence to constrain any of these ideas or any of these theories till now. This is part of a project that I recently undertook with Mark Metzler, the owner of one of the Cooper bills, who provided the bill as data for us to look at. I took the electron microscope and we had found diatoms on the bills. Now, diatoms are algae that are found in waters all over the world, but different from the slimy algae in that diatoms create this glass shell around them. And this glass shell will last forever even after the diatom dies. And the type of shell it has and the shape and style, which there are many, tells you what species it is. When we examined the Cooper money under an electron microscope at high magnification, we found a particularly interesting species of diatom. It's known as Astrionella formosa. And this one, as you can see in the picture, forms a star shape. Now, each of these spines is an individual diatom, but they tend to clump together and form these spines. And what's interesting is that they do this so they can float in the river. So these things do not go down into the mud, they float around in the water. Now, that's the first thing. It makes this diatom very identifiable. But the other interesting thing about finding this diatom on the Cooper bills was that this diatom has a big bloom in the spring and is almost absent from the Columbia River other times of the year. Now, this is a fascinating situation for us scientifically because everything we knew about the Cooper case happened in November. He jumped out of the airplane the day before Thanksgiving. If the money landed in the river in November and then subsequently got buried on the Tina Bar, on the sandbar, a very short time after that, you wouldn't have these types of diatoms in the money. The other thing is we know now that the money got wet because when the money gets wet and it's in a bundle with a rubber band, it fans out as we show in the paper. And when it fans out, that allows these diatoms, which are about the size of a blood cell, to go in between the different pages of the bills and different bills and then land on the paper to be found later under our microscope. Fascinating, fascinating discovery in the money. Now, had the money been floating around for over a year, we would find species from the entire year. But the types of species we found only occur in the springtime. So what this research has effectively done is separated the money burial from the November event of the skyjacking, which is very important because we now know Cooper couldn't have buried the money dry on Tina Bar. He couldn't have fallen down or landed in the water even at that point, crawled out on the beach, buried some of the $6,000, which was one of the theories, and then walked away. Something happened 6 months later. We don't know what year it happened. It could have happened a year later, it could have happened 5 years later, it could have happened 9 years later. But the fact that the money was so rotted says that it probably happened fairly shortly after the event. But now it gives us even more pause to think of what could possibly have happened to that money. Why would it come along 6 months later, get wet, and end up on Tina Bar? So that is the report that we've got in Scientific Reports today. And this is the first time that diatoms have been used to constrain the timeline of a forensic event. Diatoms have been somewhat underutilized in the forensics world to analyze this stuff. There's been some stuff done with drownings and some things where you can attach a body to a particular body of water based on the species mix. But this is the first time it's been used to say, okay, this is the time period during the year in which this event occurred. So fascinating product. It's been peer reviewed, looked at other scientists, and we're very happy to publish it today. So keep thinking, come up with your own ideas, hear about it in the comments, let us know, and please share it. Thank you very much.